Okay, so welcome everybody. I see some familiar faces and names from our previous sessions. So welcome back. If you joined me in the summer symposium or as well in September with integrating matter and the scientific methods, welcome back. If you're new, my name is Nicole Lamoureux, and I am a consultant here with Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortium. And today we're going to talk about bringing it together in our series of bringing it together for energy and the scientific methods, specifically focusing on the cusp, the first cusp actually, on as a sample on movement consists of direction, a pathway, and speed. All right. So to begin, we're going to do a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. So we're just going to do a quick agenda for today is we're going to look at the curriculum subject introduction and the scientific methods, as well as the verbs in the learning outcome and the cusps, the skills and procedures, for clues or cues on how to integrate and when to integrate. Then we're going to walk through a resource that you will receive today, which is a planning guide document. And that planning guide document is using the sample from energy for the first movement. Movement consists of direction, pathway, and speed. So if you were in the session with me in September, that was more of a think aloud process. Today, our session going on the gradual release of responsibility is more of a guided interactive process where I get you started on a plan that you can take forward and use in your classroom, but you would continue to plan with it. So the information in the session and the slides and the resources developed are what is under Creative Commons licensing. So what that means is you're free to copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format. You're free to adapt, like remix, transform, or build on this material. However, we're just asked that when you do share out, or if you're a school or division leader, if you're sharing the information or the slides, that you source ARPDC 2024 on the bottom. That the credit, this is also non-commercial, so it's not being shared out with any medium such as teachers pay teachers. And share alike means that when you, even if you've remixed or transformed it, that you just continue to source ARPDC. So we're going to align our session today, and I know we do align a lot of our sessions with our TQS, but there's some activities we're going to do today to kind of build on this and refer back to it. So as professionals, I think teachers are professionals like doctors and lawyers. We have quality standards that we adhere to. So for this particular session, we're going to be focusing on a teacher applies a current and comprehensive repertoire of effective planning, instruction, and assessment practices to meet the learning needs of every student. So really the subsections that we're going to focus on today is planning and designing learning activities that address the learning outcomes in the curriculum. And connected, of course, we know is assessment, that applying student assessment and evaluation practices that accurately reflect the learning outcomes within the curriculum. So there in the subsection of that as well is that we are responsible for short-term planning, medium and long-range planning. So when I looked out at the resources that are available, there's quite a few sort of short-term sample lesson plans or long-range scopes and sequences. But what I didn't see was medium-range planning or something that like a unit plan to build understanding. So a sample lesson is great, but a unit is where we're sequencing to build that understanding with our students. So the guide is going to kind of work on that a little bit today. So we're unpacking this curriculum together and learning this curriculum together. So I'm going to use the wisdom of Maya Angelou to frame the session is that we're doing the best we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we do better. So the key ideas that I want you to walk away with today is an understanding that the scientific methods are meant to be integrated into all the other organizing ideas. Secondly, they're the way in which students should be building knowledge within each organizing idea. And we'll kind of talk about that. So you probably heard me mention a lot in my other sessions about explore before explain, doing an investigation first before giving the videos and text to kind of explain the concepts, and we'll walk through that. As well, teacher clarity of the curriculum. So taking the time, and kudos to you for coming out live today or watching this from home, to unpack the curriculum because it empowers you as a professional to choose activities and resources that truly align with the curriculum. And from that clarity, we can develop a sequence to kind of build towards our understanding of these science ideas that we want our students to learn and go forward with. And of course, the planning resource is something, a document that you can take forward and work with. So we're going to look at the curriculum subject introduction. It states, the science curriculum engages students in active investigation to build scientific knowledge and develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So we know the scientific methods are the thinking skills that add robustness to our science program. As well, it states that they're integrated into all other areas of the science curriculum. But not only that, if we look at the learning outcome in all the other organizing ideas, which we're summatively assessing, it states either somewhere or starts with students investigate. So what was developed at ARPDC in consultation with our assessment consultant was a glossary science verb glossary. And investigate, so let's look at what does it mean to investigate? Well, it's to use a process of inquiry or exploration to gain deeper understanding. And in grade 1, in the knowledge statement, those steps or procedures are laid out right here. So if you were with me in the summer symposium, you know that I have created this graphic organizer to kind of help you see that it's a cyclical process, it's not step by step. All right. So in the research in science education, it kind of goes along the same line as this, is what I've mentioned, and for those of you that are new today, is explore before explain, okay? Or I've heard it said as lab before vocab. And that has to do with the fact that our students are, number one, the ages that they are, 5 or 6 years old, they're developing their vocabulary. So if we start playing videos about motion or movement, sometimes and we'll get into language and the vocabulary can interfere with their learning. So the idea is that students go through an investigation first to come to some conclusion, but they can't just sort of walk away with, I think this. They have to confirm their thinking with what is out there and confirmed with the science community. And that could be through a video, through text, or through teacher explanation. So I also saw this in Peter Lillenhall's Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, because math and science are kind of similar. And I think this really speaks to science as well, to sum up. Learning truly sticks when students engage in hands-on math or hands-on science investigations. Names of concepts or science ideas should come after their experiences with those ideas. Otherwise, they're just simply memorizing or regurgitating back what we're saying to them. So not only is it indicated in our learning outcomes, it's also stated throughout the skills and procedures with things like predict, determine, explore. And I want to point out that explore isn't just playing, it's an informal investigation. Students can still make predictions when they're exploring certain concepts, or they can make, of course, they're observing or recording some of that. We have observe, investigate, examine. So I chose this cusp for a specific reason about movement consists of direction, a pathway, and speed, because in it, it's a small amount of skills here. But if we look over here, it says conduct an investigation. How is conducting an investigation different than investigate? Well, if we go to our verb glossary, it says conduct means to engage in the process of planning and carrying out, like an investigation. So if you think of a conductor in a symphony or an orchestra, they're behind the scenes, arranging, planning about how it's going to be executed or performed. So the expectation is that our students will be involved on some level in grade 1. It starts in grade 2 a little bit more formally, but we can bring them into the investigation as well. So the resource document that you're going to receive today is the planning guide document that has links to the sample that we're going to walk through and links to other various resources to help you plan going forward. So this is the title page. It is a PDF. These are all hyperlinked steps, so you can use it digitally or print it off if you choose. And then what you'll see here is an explanation of that phase, an example, and that shouldn't say light, but it's changed in your document, and then guiding questions to help you in that phase, as well as a toolbox. And in that toolbox, as I mentioned, are linked resources to help you within that phase. So some links are the science verb glossary, as I mentioned. ARPDC is putting forward, some of you might be aware of a curriculum planning and resource document that has lots of resources that you're looking for linked to the CUSPs. CMAST, the Center for Mathematics and Science Technology and Education, has a wonderful site that they're currently developing that some of you might be aware of with lesson plan ideas or different pieces that we'll talk about. The sample planner that I'm referring to today, as well as a blank planner template to move forward. So the ideas for this resource didn't just come from me in my head. They came from some review of literature and research. So we have our tried and true understanding by design with Wiggins and McTighe, keeping the end in mind for that summative piece, planning that first, but as well as teacher clarity. And in John Hattie's meta-analysis, being clear and understanding what our students need to learn from the curriculum can have an impact of over a year's worth of growth, because then we want to have our students be clear on what they're learning. So if a teacher we need to start with the teacher first. And on that note, this teacher clarity playbook was integral in the sequencing out or mapping out of the unit that you're going to receive today. And it was very beneficial in helping that to plan that out. So some jurisdictions have different ways or approaches, like I can statements or learning intentions. So the sequencing will help you develop that as a first step. Okay, not only that, hot off the press was a report that came out in December from the Education Endowment Foundation on improving primary science. And that report did an international scan of best practices for primary science. So planning to focus on clarity starts with unpacking the curriculum. And I know we feel that that's something that we have done, but it might be looking at it in a different way in terms of how our students are taking a learning journey with us from the beginning, middle, and end. And that developing these science ideas can't happen in one lesson. It's a series of lessons that unfold. And so it requires us to really understand that. So we're going to unpack this guide now and kind of use it and show some examples going through. Okay. So to begin with, we analyze the learning outcome to identify the skills and concepts which direct the how and what of summative assessment. And I know we know that the learning outcome is what we summatively assess, but I've also attached the scientific methods, because as we read, the scientific methods are meant to be integrated in other organizing ideas. So you will be focusing summatively on an aspect of the scientific methods along the way. And that we have to think that these are skills. It's kind of like writing. You wouldn't give a unit test and expect your grade ones to be able to write a story at the end of September in 1 month. So that's the same thing with the scientific methods. I have seen some resources out there that have unit tests for scientific methods, but in grade one, it's not something that I would do because they're applying these skills through other organizing ideas to build knowledge in those other organizing ideas. So the guiding question is, what concepts, nouns, or science ideas do students need to learn? So I've underlined the concepts here: direction, pathway, speed of moving objects and animals. So all of those things are ideas, right? And in scientific methods of investigation itself. So this is the foundational year of predict, what is an observation, how do we record those observations, and reflect on that for making conclusions. So then we look at the skills, and here we see investigate. So it's all through investigation that our students are going to be working through these ideas. And we just talked about what investigate means. It's those procedures, and that they will engage in, of course, the investigation, but they're also going to describe the investigation. So if you go to our verb glossary briefly, we know engage means to take part in, but describe is to communicate those features or properties or qualities in writing or in orally. Okay, so now that we know that the learning outcome is broad, that's our summative assessment, but what does that all mean? Well, we know that the cusps break it down. And so what we do is we examine the cusps to identify important concepts, those science ideas and the skills that the students are going to demonstrate for learning. And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit today. So in the understanding statement, it says movement consists of direction, a pathway, and speed. So I've color-coded those concepts. And in here, it's the ways of describing. So this is very much vocabulary development. So that's going to be part of what we're going to be doing in terms of knowing what a direction is and how to describe it. And you can see movement pathway for what is an animal follow. So it's been defined, so students need to know that. And then how they describe it is listed here, as well as speed. They also have to know about the movement of the object itself, that it rolls or it bounces, and it says such as, and we know such as means a sampling, or we can add to that area as well. But what I want is I want you to help me with looking at the skills, specifically the verbs, those actions that students do that we're watching for when we're formatively assessing. So in here, there should be 6 verbs that you'll circle. So just drop in the chat and you can just list the words and let me know the words. I'm going to pause for 1 or 2 minutes. Our 2 and 3 colleagues did well on this, so I'm sure you'll do fine. So please just list the verbs from the skills that we should be looking for when formatively assessing. Yep, describe is definitely one. Good job. Right here, they describe the direction, pathway, and speed. Great work. Conduct, record, nice. Thank you, Adam and Christy. Okay, you guys are on the ball here. And we're going to talk about how critical it is to know these things, because we're going to look at activities and resources. So conduct an investigation to determine, and that should be circled there too, how objects move, right? And we're going to talk about what determine means. Observe, describe as you picked out, and we got record as well. So when we look, we're formatively assessing, what do I put the triangle because we think of triangulation of evidence. You know, what do I want to see, observe my students? What do I want to hear in their conversations? Not just products. So when we conduct an investigation, we're doing it for a purpose or a reason, and that is to determine how objects move. Well, determine in our glossary means to find a conclusion or solution using procedures. Those procedures are the scientific methods and the steps within that we have just outlined. Okay. And describe, we've talked about, observe, I'm sure you know, and record can be verbally written or using, as it states in our curriculum, photographs and videos. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the second cusp for a very particular reason about this. So if we look here, it says demonstrate how movement of objects can be influenced. And we know that it says in the glossary that demonstrate means to show or express an understanding through actions. So I'm thinking, okay, how the movement of objects can be influenced by the shape of an object. So here I, have an investigation where they've got a crumpled ball of paper, and then they've got this flat piece of paper, and the student says the ball dropped faster than the sheet of paper. So they're looking at the speed. So the first cusp is really developing that language so they can describe how it's influenced and demonstrate that with their movement and actions. But this is the last time I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat. I want you to think about this, okay, and resources that are out there or being developed. Students, again, the verbs are the actions that they're using to demonstrate their learning that we're watching for. So which activity allows students to best display the combined knowledge and skills, okay? Demonstrate, we know, means through action, how the movement of objects can be influenced by the interactions with other objects. We have a resource here or an activity note here, number 1. And then we have an activity 2 here where students are observing and, playing with marbles and hitting other marbles. When my marble hit the other marble, it bounced and rolled forward. So they're using it and describing it. So take a moment, drop in the chat, which resource do you think best fits what this skill and development is looking for, number 1 or number 2? Nice. Number 2, absolutely. However, I will say that I have seen resources linked to our curriculum doing pull and pushes. And I was thinking to myself, why? I don't see that in the knowledge statement until I went to the second cusp. And it has to do with a science idea. So a force is an interaction. So somebody had their science vitamins that day and knew that. However, a push and a pull describes an interaction between two objects. So we're not asking them to describe the interaction between two objects. They're asking them to demonstrate how movement, so they're focusing on the movement is influenced by the interaction. So I really wanted to point that out because it's really important to understand your curriculum to choose the right tool. There are going to be a lot of resources out there, and regardless of who publishes them, it's our responsibility, according to the quality standards, to ensure that the activities we bring in our classroom accurately reflect the curriculum. So knowing that helps you choose the right tool. Okay, so we are going to get into this a little bit more. Now, when we look back at the first cusp, you can see here it says conduct an investigation, that the students are going to investigate both moving objects and animals. When they're conducting the investigation, it's focusing on how objects move. Excuse me, this is Canva, and so it's very touchy. So I am focusing on objects today, but I will touch on the movement of animals because they are expected to observe and describe the direction and pathway and speed of animals, and as well as record the pathway for animals when they're describing them with objects as well. So we're going to kind of get into that a little bit. So now that you've analyzed the learning outcome and examined the cusps to really sort of get a feel for what it is that they're working on, we want to connect the ideas from our curriculum to foundational science ideas to kind of enhance, essential science ideas for teacher clarity to enhance student learning. So work very clear, but also to determine potential student misconceptions to consider with teaching and assessing. So I've been working with grade 2s and 3s a lot on that because there's a lot of research out there in those areas. In movement, there isn't as much, except for what I've kind of just mentioned to you that I saw was a bit of confusion, but I will share a few things. So what you want to consider in this part of your planning stage is, what terms or science ideas do I, as an educator, feel clear on? And what do I need to learn more about or refresh my memory? What concepts in this learning outcome are connected to previous grades? So in kindergarten, they touch on movement. We'll go through that. And what science vocabulary might be used in a non-science context or everyday language that can confuse students with the different science meaning? Okay. So I think this quote is really important to remember, that in other subject areas such as math and English language arts and literacy, we have a lot of professional development in those areas. And there's been a lot of extensive research in terms of misconception and foundational ideas. So it is important in science as well to keep those things in our mind, but also be aware that students can come with, they do have an understanding of the world, way the world works, and they can come with some misunderstandings. So we want to be aware of that because it can interfere with their learning as well. So in the planning guide document, you can, and there's these sites out there that do have and talk about misconceptions. And one of them is Explorify. And this is a great site. It's written in a very sort of everyday language. It's for teachers. It's out of the United Kingdom, and they have tackled the tricky bits. I saw some things to do with living things that I think might connect to grade 1, as well as CMAST has, they are developing that and sharing that out. But again, it's in progress, so please check back. And I want to make you aware that National Science Teaching Association, nsta.org, you don't need a paid membership. That gives you access to a journal, but you can still access the articles for free. Paige Keeley has great formative assessment probes when they align. So a little bit of a background builder, because movement is very straightforward in this curriculum, but in physical sciences, they use the term motion about objects. This isn't so specified, but this is our background knowledge. And in biological science, they use movement. So, and also we know this too, that, objects need other objects to start moving or people to move them, but locomotion is self-movement in biological sciences. And what you're doing in grade 1 is foundational for physical sciences in terms of describing, observing and describing the effect of force, which is movement. We don't see forces, but we see the change in movement, and you're providing that vocabulary for the students moving forward. And I think this is just a grammatical thing. We never say that a bird is in motion. We actually say we don't say in movement, we say in motion. Okay. All right. So in the previous grades in kindergarten, and I've distilled this down to an essence, basically they're learning what movement is, defining it as a change in location and position. So it is a bridge year, but I would say that you're going to have to review that every year. So I have a sample lesson for that today. In that, movement consists in grade 1 now, we're looking at describing movement, that it consists of speed, direction, and a pathway. And then grade 2, it might seem that they're going off in another direction, but travel, light has a path, and they're talking about pathway here. So kind of thinking about these concepts in terms of a 1-2 split. But as I mentioned, contact force for grade 3, a push and a pull, we don't really see that, but what we see is a change in direction or a change in speed is what they're looking at. So really what you're doing is very foundational as well, which is new in this curriculum in the sense that it's building from year to year. So I mentioned about science vocabulary, and what came out of that report is just how important it is. And I think it is in every subject. But what they talked about is there's these words, and I knew about this idea, but I learned a big word, polysemous words. And what that is words that have everyday meaning, but also have a science meaning. And so students every day might experience the vocabulary and then come to your class, and for example, slide, they might think playground slide instead of describing the motion of sliding, okay? Another one for grade 3 would have been force, like I'm forcing you to do your homework, I'm forcing you to do something, when in science it's a push and a pull. So that's part of the learning process we have to be aware of. And again, we know about tier 1, 2, and 3 words, and they're related to science and pulling those out. So tier 2 is again the scientific methods, and that goes across all disciplines or even in other subjects they observe, they describe or predict. And tier 3 would be those words specific to our organizing idea for motion, movement, and those sorts of things. So connected in that report, I sort of thought about this, and some of you probably as grade 1 teachers know about the 3 teachers in the classroom, because the suggestions to help with development of vocabulary really made me think of this, that there's you as the teacher, their peers as teachers, and of course the walls in the classroom, the environment as the teacher. So those are ways to work through. So for example, direction, filling out, following directions in your homework or something. So you can make students aware that there are these double meanings of words, explicitly teaching the vocabulary as well. And then of course, we know about using anchor charts, but co-constructing with students, getting them to put in some pictures or draw some pictures and add to that, and that'll be incorporated within the sample lessons that you'll receive today. This is an example of a movement anchor chart that I saw. So we will be working on developing one. Also, the use of sentence stems and having vocabulary up to support the learners as they're working through the ideas, so that when they're working in partners and peer interaction, they can correct each other and help each other. And then, of course, you walking around, and you can kind of correct them and point to, you mentioned the ball moved up. So the direction of the ball moved was up. Okay, so kind of using that and enhancing that. So now that we've connected our curriculum ideas with some of those foundational ideas, I know grade 1 is a little simpler. Now we're ready to plan. Now we're ready to sequence out and sort of unfold this and develop that understanding. So develop learning progressions that have a logical sequence from the perspective of the student, and combine the knowledge statements and the skills. So they've been separated in our curriculum. So when I was looking at teacher clarity, and the next slide will enhance this, they talk about combining them and placing them in an order. How are we going to map out the ideas to develop that understanding? And how will students use explore before explain, that integrating of the scientific methods to build knowledge? So I've attached that on the side, which you'll see. And what resources would support learning engagement with both the explore and the explain phase during this? So I don't go out and look for resources first thinking I'm talking about movement. I unpack the curriculum, and once I go through and I really understand it, now I'm ready to find the proper resources and learning engagements to support my students. And I want to make note that the sample planner that you'll receive is in here, linked in here, as well as a blank planner template. So we've gone through and unpacked the knowledge statement and the cusps. These are not lesson plans, but they're just sequencing out these concepts. So you can see here that I've combined the knowledge and skills together, and in a way that's going to flow. So for example, you can see here, conduct an investigation to determine the direction. That's where I put the knowledge statement of an object. And then I put in observe and describe, and I put the words from the knowledge statement that students are going to use to describe direction. Okay, then students are going to conduct an investigation to determine the movement pathway of an object. So they're describing that movement pathway coming from the knowledge statement added in here, and record it. And then conduct an investigation to determine the speed of the object. So I'm kind of combining it to help me kind of go, what order, how am I going to work through this? Okay, so here on that slide, I said I was going to show you. So here's where I have that combined, but I've attached the scientific methods because I'm thinking, okay, they're going to be conducting an investigation. What steps are they using? And what skills from the curriculum? They don't have to be all of them. Some of them I'll work through, some of them not so much, depending on the organizing idea and what's being asked. This is conducting, there's a little bit more involved. Then I look, and here you're going to receive in the sample planner today a link to these resources for the explore phase. And normally in other organizing ideas, I would have had books and videos. I couldn't find just specifically on direction. So what I decided was that was when the teacher was going to help co-construct a concept map of movement in the center. And as they work through direction, we add a piece to what movement is, and you'll see that. At the end, I do synthesize with video and a connect, extend, challenge thinking routine to help students process the video with what they've learned by their own investigation and observations and conclusions in the classroom. So now that we kind of, okay, this is the flow and these are the scientific methods that are going to be integrated, now I'm ready to look for summatively determining evidence of success to for what students know, understand, and are able to put into action in an unfamiliar or real life context as a result of learning in the unit. Okay, so looking at that summative piece, I really have an understanding now. And the guiding question is, how will students take the verb from the learning outcome and attach it? So how will students investigate direction, pathway, and speed of objects? We kind of already know that. And how can I use understanding statements? So how will students record? Because as I mentioned, the scientific methods we need to be sort of summatively assessing along the way. So if you were in with me in September, they were looking at, observation. Well, now they're going to be working on developing the recording of those observations to look back and reflect on it in the future. So the summative task for this was using what students have learned through investigating how movement consists of speed, direction, and a pathway. Students will teach others. So it might be through a buddy class, their parents at demo of learning, or other siblings on how to play marbles. Okay, so the criteria, and I've integrated, actually, I'm going to go back here. I did integrate the computer science about sequencing 2 or 3 directions as well. So they're provided with 3 steps of instructions. So they'll be cut out of order. They're going to place it in proper order, and then they will demonstrate how to play. But as they're playing, they're going to describe, and we're co-constructing criteria with them, the speed, direction, and pathway that maybe they choose one marble that it's using. So I'm recommending to use Flip or iPad. Flip would be great because they could even type, the marble went forward and it went fast or something like that. So they're using some of that vocabulary in there as well. I also think, going back to that interaction, this would be a great also way of getting students to look at the interaction with other objects as well. So you want to co-construct criteria with students so that they are best able to hit the goal. And so you might be like, well, what words, do we want to hear when we're describing, how the marble moved? What should we do? Oh, the speed we should be talking, and kind of work with students on that. But this is the rubric. So what's in pink is from the energy skills and procedures here. So observe and describe the direction of an object. And then this is the criteria: correctly uses either up, down, forward, backward, toward, or away from to describe the direction of the marble took, okay, in the game. Observe and describe the pathway of an object. And so correctly use the vocabulary and observe and describe the speed of an object. So then in the scientific method skill, reflect on recorded data to draw conclusions, uses drawing, words, and/or video to record, and then uses recorded data to reflect and draw conclusions to make the descriptions of their direction, pathway, and speed. And then this is the scientific methods of sequencing and putting it in order to achieve a desired outcome. So you've got your grow statements here in your glow if you need to add to that as well, and that's in the document guide as well. So now that we know kind of the flow where we're going, we've got a summative assessment task. Now we're ready to plan the lessons to develop and sharpen those things that we need to do, like how would they record their observations and whatnot. So we want to plan for instruction that is cohesive from the student's perspective, remembering that they're 6 or 7 years old and they're developing their vocabulary. And we want to be strategic in sequencing those lessons to build on prior knowledge and learning, as well as having potential to extend student thinking. So the questions you're going to be thinking about in this phase is, what underlying prior knowledge do the students need to have from the previous grade, which we touched on? And so I have a review lesson. How can I access the what students' ideas they already bring? So I have a little bit of a pre-assessment task. And then how can I minimize student misconception? I really think the only area that students may potentially get confused is between the pathway an object takes and the movement of the object itself. So that might require a little bit of working through. And what vocabulary and science or everyday science might interfere. Okay, I think direction might be one. Pathway, like there's a few things we need to make sure they're clear on. And then what do I want to hear or see during the lessons that demonstrate progress towards those skills and procedures? So what do listening to their conversation as well as watching them. Now, on the side here, I do have links, some instructional strategies that I'm going to mention that I can't get into today for time reasoning. So you can go back and look at that after as well. So I just want to pause and talk about this in a different way, even with lesson development. Is it really isn't about you explaining to your students what the science idea is. It's about you as a teacher creating a learning environment in which they, the students, can construct the explanation in science. So again, going through that investigation cycle in order to develop that concrete understanding first. Right? I hope I'm not going backwards. Okay, so what I've developed, and I might have mentioned this in my previous sessions, is a learning summary table that you can put up, or you can use a Google slide if you don't have the room for that. Because one of the criticisms is the overload of cognitive load for students, right? They're going to be keeping things in their mind. So and also using each other to think, pair, share about these ideas to consolidate learning at the end. So when they do a small scale investigation or activity, they can talk about what they observed and make a conclusion by what did we learn from what we observed? And how does it help us understand the driving question or the big question, which we'll get into? And then I attached vocabulary, but with yours, I put in I wonder questions that you can change that or adapt it. That's fine. I use this teacher as an example. So they used images to record that. I thought that was a good refresher for students to help them remember. So the learning summary table you have, like the driving question is, how can we use what we know about movement to play marbles? And so they're going to be doing those small scale investigations to be building along the way. And so these are like the observations, the conclusion, what did we learn from the data? So they'll reflect on the recorded data and talk about that. And then how does this help us understand how the marbles move during the game and how to play it? Because if they're thinking about the direction and they're thinking about the pathway, then that's something they can connect that back to, which deepens their learning. And then, of course, a spot for I wonder questions, because they should be asking questions along the way. And also for you, formatively assessing, students don't ask questions about things that they know. They ask questions about things they don't know. And as an aside, I've been working with some grade 2 teachers, and they were noticing, because in grade 2, they have to develop questions for the purpose of an investigation, that students couldn't write, that some of them were writing statements. So as grade 1, that would be really helpful to develop between what's a statement and a question and kind of work on those skills to help out those grade 2 teachers later on. Okay, so we're going to look at and walk through sample lessons today. So I started you off with a plan, which you're going to receive. I'll walk through the document as well at the end of this. And then I started you off with some sample lessons. So the bridge lesson review on movement is about 2 2 days. And then conducting an investigation to determine the direction of an object is about 2 or 3 days. And then you can kind of see where I'm going and how I'm working with that to continue planning on your own, but I'll be giving you some resources as well. So when I said co-construct your anchor chart, and please excuse the fact that this is Google Drawing, because I'm sure that you'll do a nice, beautiful job of an anchor chart, but this would be developed with and co-constructed with students towards the end. So movement is in the middle, and you'll see how I'm going with this. And then we're going to add direction and slowly get through adding these, having it up so students can refer back to it and use it for the language that they're going to need for their investigation. So I mentioned to you that the students would be having a bridge lesson. So, I might begin by asking them about movement, what they know, just like a little bit of bringing their prior knowledge. But my colleague Ted from ERLC puts together these concept attainments, which I quite like. And so this will be a resource you receive, and it has the notes for you for the lesson. But basically what you're gonna do or say to your students, we're gonna look at pictures with examples and non-examples, and we're gonna come up with what is movement. So they're going to look here, and it's going to be rough. It's not going to be smooth. They're not going to come up and say, movement is a change in position or location. But, they're going to talk. Their brains are primed. They're thinking about it. And then you can tell and read them. Well, movement is when something changes location. Let's change location. Let's get up and move location. Get them to walk. Let's take our pencil and move the pencil's location. Okay. Then you would add that to the concept map chart. So I'm going to go back here, and you would add what movement is to here. It's a change in position. So you're starting with this in the center of your anchor chart was my suggestion. And then the change, now, of course, this, I'm just going to go back and pop in here because it moves. Then you're like, well, we're not really done. There's more things involved with movement. And then they'll look here, and then it's a change in position. Now, of course, they're not going to be solid. They're going to need some practice. So there's a continuation in this lesson of looking at different things and describing them with position and location, and practicing that as well. So then you add that. Okay, so then once they're clear on movement and what it is and practicing that, then we're ready to launch the unit. And when I talk about phenomena-based learning, it's not just a hook or an anticipatory set. I think some people had a misconception of that. It's actually used like what scientists really do. Scientists don't just do little investigations. They do little investigations to understand something bigger that they're looking at. And so they observe something. They don't just ask questions. They actually observe something. And that's what a phenomena is. It's just an observable event. And this phenomena is basically the students observe a marble tournament. And you press play, you show it for a short bit, and have them focus in on, because they've already been thinking about movement and what it is and practicing it and practicing a change in position and a change in location the previous lesson or two. Then you want to have them focus on the movement of the marbles in the tournament. And then they think, pair, share. You record their ideas up here. That spot was created if you choose to use this. And then because they're sharing with their partner, now you give them the graphic organizer for them to show. Now, this is a pre-assessment as well. What ideas do they come with? That's when you walk around and you can ask them, you're talking about it turning. How could you show turn? How could you show up? And getting them to kind of think about these things. But this also gives you insight into what ideas they do bring. But hang on to this graphic organizer for the end, because when they're done, that's why the phenomena is not just a provocation or an anticipatory set. It's something we're going to keep coming back to. So now they're ready to get into direction. And so I'm not sure if some of you did some computer science and have done this already or not. But what I thought about was the need for understanding the vocabulary. So I'm going to do this on purpose. So they get this clear copy like this. You have a secret copy and you're like, okay, we're going to help Beeper get home. And then you give them some direction and they draw and then they share it. Everybody's got different directions of how to get Beeper home. They don't know how to get him home. So then you show your copy and you're like, well, and I will use me as the teacher. What did Miss Lamoureux do wrong? What do we need to know in order to understand how to, walk or get something somewhere? And that's part of it. And then we talk about just-in-time vocabulary. Okay, so you don't say that to them, but now we're going to bring in directions. So here we had our center of the anchor chart ready, and then now you're going to add that concept of a direction. And then you're going to introduce the vocabulary of up, down. Get some from them, some directions that they've seen things move. So they're going to come up with up and down first, I'm pretty positive, and get them to practice using their bodies and then, and forward, backward. But you don't have to use my images. You can get them to add images or, come up with some kind of image to help remember forward, backward, like arrows might help. So that's completely your call. You can adjust that. So you want to then, now that they have the vocabulary, get them to practice it. You can use Simon Says. I have some YouTube videos, but they go off beyond our curriculum, which is okay. You might go back and now let's try with your partner with getting Beeper home. Let's practice, giving and going forward 2 steps, moving up. They may need more practice. So, during transitions between subjects or movement breaks, get some practice using some of those words, like let's change position, let's change location, let's move up, let's go down, let's take our pen, grabbing objects as well. So now that they have the vocabulary, because they need the vocabulary in order to describe in their observations, now they're ready to kind of make a little bit of a small scale investigation. So now they're going to basically with their partner, they're going to look at a marble. You'll give them a marble and they can practice looking and observing. Even you can teach them how to shoot the marble. But I said, have a hula hoop or something like that where it's contained and they have to keep that marble within there. And they practice kind of, or you could even, get them to observe and kind of describe that. And, or practice even like get the marble to move towards someone, get the marble to move away from partner A or partner B. I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So moving towards something, moving away from something. Then what I have suggested in the sample lesson plan is having them go to the playground and observe equipment. And that you can have the option of recording or verbally describing. It's your call, your classroom best. So then we come back to this learning summary table. So now they've observed their marbles. Okay, what did we observe? Marbles bounce up, and everybody, they think pair share. Some of them rolled forward, some of them rolled back. So they're just using describing words in their observations, right? And the direction of playground equipment too, they can add to that underneath. Then what you want to do is, what did we learn about movement and the direction? So objects, this is generalizing out now, right? Objects move in different ways, move in different directions in different ways. And this is just an example. You probably not get something so perfect, but you're kind of working with them to craft those conclusions which they need to make. Then again, we're always connecting it back to how does this help us understand? So how about knowing about direction help us understand how marbles move during a game? And they can kind of talk about that. And I left it with I wonder questions, or you can change that to science vocabulary. If you don't want to do the concept map and put direction here, that's okay too. That's completely your decision. So that is the sample plan, lesson plans to get you started from that particular unit, and I'll walk through that. But you'll continue doing something similar with the concept map and whatnot, with conducting an investigation to determine the objects of the pathway. So I do have samples from Canva that I'll show you as well, that with Giphies that show movement. So the students have to describe the direction, so you can continue practicing. You will have to plan with determining the speed that objects move and describe how they move, but there are some sample resources I have in there as well to develop lessons around. So when you get towards the end, and I said keep that picture, well, now they're going to have a lot of vocabulary and ways in which they can describe the movement after. So you can use a different color pencil crayon or a sticky they can add to it, or you give them a fresh new copy of this. So they look at the before and after, and you can even verbally do an I used to think, now I think, so that they can reflect on how they've learned as well. And then they can go off and work on their summative task after you finish that. So I was sort of saying, you can work on, different diagrams of going up, forward. I don't know if grade 1 will get too much into that, but you could kind of help work with that a little bit when they're recording as well, and that's a sample. So I was going to walk through, before we finish today, I was going to walk through the sample document. So what you're going to receive today as well is the sample plan for Marble Mania. And basically you can get marbles on Amazon. They're not that expensive. And this is a plan to get you started. So you have the table of contents of things that I've referred to today. So if you want to kind of jump to those certain spots, but I'll just briefly show you. So this is the sequence of the combined knowledge and skills together. And then this is where I have, and the dollar store, you're right, Karen. I was thinking about that. It says hit and miss with that dollar store, but Walmart too. This is where I combine the scientific methods and where you receive some documents or ideas to go forward. But when you go to the material section, which is listed in your table of contents, I have, no, you didn't miss the link. I will be sending the link in a moment. I just want to walk through this so you know where things are. So I have the practice. I just want to show you this. I don't know if you've used Canva, and if you haven't, it's great. This is the student organizing idea, the organizer. Okay. So in Canva, this is also for extra practice for students. And then if Canva has free memberships, by the way, for teachers. And why I develop everything in Canva is because it's I have a license for it, and then it's not copyrighted. I can share it out. So basically, when you're practicing, you can ask like what direction, and it goes through different directions for things like this. That's linked in here, and the student graphic organizer. Here we go. It's a little bit different. Okay, and you can use science journals. You don't have to use my graphic organizer. It's just there as a guide. And you can do some things verbally, and you don't have to follow it to a T or anything. But that's there, beeper's there, some different forms of beeper. And then, for the direction of our marbles, they can circle, did it go up, down, backwards, forwards? They can try a couple of times. Movement on the playground, you may just want them to draw, that's verbally describing. I have 2 different options. I have some with pictures. Now movement path, it says observe and record. So movement path, they do need to record. So I give little like signals for them to kind of work with, and you may choose. Can we have documents via sending on? Yes, it will be sent out. The video and the links to all of this will be sent out as well. And then the instructions, I didn't know if you wanted text only, if you had some super readers, and then I have some with images as well. So you can use that. And then that's the start. So to cut those out and put them, and then this is not dotted, meaning This just kind of is where the rest of the game, like basically how to win it, and then just practice sort of things like that. So you will receive, ARPDC will send you an email because you are registered. So you'll receive a link to this, but I'm going to move this down and I'm going to share with you a copy of this. It's all linked into this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to share this with you. Actually, I'm going to share first session document. Okay, I'm going to share the planning guide with you, and then I'm going to share the document as well. Link to the planning guide. And then this is the plan. I'm going to give you a forced copy so that you can add to it, modify it, and however. But I hope that gets you started and you can see how to work with the planning of the curriculum and the science curriculum. And here you go as a forced copy. Oh, I think I was sending this to one person instead of, sorry. I'll resend this. Well, sorry about that. And now's the time you can open up the chat if you have any questions or anything like that. There we go. This PDF probably will open up in a new tab. All right. And Martina, yes, I'll share them out with you. Okay, I'm going to stop recording, and if you have any questions,